Toxic masculinity as a concept is used in two different ways. Politically, it's an ideological weapon to denigrate manliness as a whole, and psychologically, it describes an unhealthy, destructive expression of manliness. The political perspective presupposes that there is a culture war going on in our society, feminists against traditional men. From this perspective, we could either avoid the word toxic masculinity in order not to submit to the feminist narrative by entering their frame of discussion, or we could adopt the word in order to infiltrate the narrative and hijack their ideological weapon by exposing feminists or straw feminists as quote-unquote man-haters. The problem with both these options is that presupposing a cultural war leads to ideological camping. Is feminism something to be fought against or something to be discussed rationally? I believe that giving up the rational frame of debate would, metapolitically speaking, already be a surrender to the postmodern ideology underlying post-second wave feminism. Therefore, we should adopt the psychological view of toxic masculinity. Now, if we see toxic masculinity as the unhealthy, destructive side of manliness, we have again two options. We can either adopt the word toxic masculinity to signal that we are not bigoted but willing to recognize the feminist point of view, or we can avoid the word because it is so ideology laden and it would only stir up emotions and undermine a constructive dialogue. If you have listened thus far, I assume that you are rational enough to use the word toxic masculinity analytically without getting caught up in prejudices and emotions. Therefore, I will not substitute the word with a more academic or clinical one. Conceptually, though, I understand toxic masculinity in the same way as I understand negative masculinity, or to give a definition, an expression of masculinity that has negative outcomes on well-being in the long term. To acknowledge that toxic masculinity is real is to acknowledge that being a man is not the same as being a good person. A good person is someone who tries to do the right thing, that is, to maximize long-term well-being, both for himself and for other people. He's thinking win-win and playing a positive-sum game. A manly man can be a good person, but he need not be, because goodness and manliness are orthogonal concepts. Now, we could debate whether they are truly orthogonal. After all, behaving like a man is to an extent intrinsically rewarding for most men and thus directly linked to one aspect of well-being. There seem to be hormonal and neurobiological reward mechanisms that make a man feel good when he does manly shit, and these hedonic rewards may tilt the orthogonality a little bit due to accumulated short-term effects on well-being. For the purposes of simplicity, however, I stick to the orthogonal description. So this is how we can conceptualize toxic masculinity for a basis of rational dialogue. What might some examples be? It is actually quite simple to distinguish roughly between healthy and toxic forms of masculinity. For example, grounded strategic aggression is healthy, whereas erratic, impulsive aggression is toxic. Emotion suppression to achieve a good outcome is healthy, whereas emotion suppression to defend the maladapted ego is toxic. Positive sum competition, as we have with athletics and capitalism, is healthy, whereas zero sum or negative sum competition, as with imperialism or crusaderism, is toxic. Self-defense and violence to liberate is healthy, whereas sadism and violence to oppress is toxic. Seduction and sexual boldness are healthy, whereas sexual harassment and sexual assault are toxic. Productive leadership is healthy, whereas tyrannical leadership is toxic. True pride, which is earned and pro-social, is healthy, whereas hubristic pride, which is ego-driven and maladaptive, is toxic. One hindrance in the discussion, however, is that long-term well-being is maximized differently than short-term well-being. Practically, this means that an obnoxious, hyper-aggressive asshole will often experience positive consequences in the short term. He may, for example, get what he wants when his adversaries cave in out of fear or moral disgust. Yet although the asshole might have won this time, he has played a zero-sum game and so lost a potential cooperative partner and diminished his social skills for the future. Toxic masculinity is also more conducive to getting laid than being healthily emasculated. Combine this with the insanely powerful biological drive for sex, and what you get is men who flee towards the holy grail of masculinity without any regard for the toxins it might hold. My intention here is not to blame heterosexual women for their attraction to toxic masculinity. That's just biology. Rather, I want to highlight, especially for young men who may be listening to this, that it is not necessary to be an asshole in order to be sexually attractive. There's plenty of green in the upper right quadrant. Hence, we need not defend masculinity as the ultimate value. Masculine is, even if you have a heteronormative attitude, not synonymous with good if you're a man. Because being relentlessly masculine can clearly have negative effects on a man's personal and a society's general well-being. Just ask any clinical psychologist or the parents of a school shooting victim. Conversely, it should also be clear that pride, violence, dominance, aggression, competition, sexual boldness, and emotion suppression are not inherently bad. They can be good if used in the right context and for the right purpose. Full contact sports, entrepreneurial risk-taking, adaptive stoicism, and functionally sexually polarized relationships are good examples here. So let us quit moralizing, let us see the nuances, let us analyze the outcomes, and let us praise masculinity when it deserves to be praised.